Hello, welcome back. I was thinking let's talk a little bit more about storytelling and not just for writers who are creating fiction and such, but any of us that are in the world with our friends, with our family, and we want to be a part of the conversation. Or maybe we're meeting new people, like through our career or something. And you just have this feeling that you want to be included and you want the things you say to be of value. And yet it's so funny how we reserve the idea that storytelling is only for the people that know us best, or like I said, where we might put stories in our book. We kind of end up with this extreme, and we tend to live in the middle. You know, we have friends, we have people we work with, and we want to go out, be with them, and engaging and fun. But there's also a time to just let people know you a little better. Maybe not right away, not, you know, hello, shake their hand and tell them your life story. Maybe not that, but you can kind of feel, when do I want to share more about me so that this friendship, this romance, this relationship with a new colleague, this partnership in business, whatever it is, it can develop. Some people didn't grow up around their family, and so in their adult years, when they get to move around and get to be where they choose to live, they choose to get to know, who are all these people that I would love to call my family. Right now, they kind of feel like strangers. They're blood relatives, but I'd like to get to know them. Well, that always brings you back to, how comfortable are you in your story? How comfortable are you in this life that you are living day to day? And what bits and pieces do you choose to tell others? Now, I never want to encourage people to exaggerate the truth or to um, make up, really just make up something that never happened. I'm not in favor of that. I'm also not in favor, because I don't think it builds good relationships. I'm not in favor of telling all and saying, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. I won't say no to anything. I've met people like that. And what I've noticed is that they would like to be an open book. But if at some point you ask them something that's too personal, you might not ever hear from them again. And it can come really without any warning. So stay in that middle zone where you're telling the truth, but you're curating, you're deciding, you're choosing what to talk about. So let me give you some examples of how getting to know people and feeling a little more comfortable with your story allows you to decide what to say. So here's tip number one. Usually people want to talk about things that are apparent to them right away. That's the first thing they want to say. So let's say I'm wrapping up a job interview, or I'm meeting a new friend. One of the first things I've heard over and over and over again is people ask me, what's your heritage? I've never seen hair that blonde. Where are you from? It's an obvious thing to ask. So when I was really young, I was very uncomfortable to tell people the real story. I would say to them, my family's from Ireland, England, and Norway. So that was true. I'd say that. And I'd say, and you know, in Norway, there's a lot of people with very blonde hair. And I try to leave it at that because it was true. It just seemed like enough. And as a really young person, you know, 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, it just felt like I've said enough. But what I've come to know is that I stand out. My blonde hair stands out because I'm albino. I have very little pigmentation. And so it's been this way my whole life. It will be this way until the day I die. But it took a lot of years to tell people that because in my own personal experience, I had experienced sad things, hard things, difficult things because I'm albino. I've experienced a lot of sunburn because I don't have the pigment in my skin to protect me from overexposure to sunlight. I have to really monitor how much time I'm going to be in the sun, what time of day, things like that. So in my mind, albinism was a negative for that reason. Another reason was that with albinism is a limited pigmentation to the eyes. And when you don't have full pigmentation, you don't have your full eyesight. So I've had about 20 to 30% acuity for my whole life, meaning if you have 20/20 vision, you have 100% acuity. Well, I don't have anywhere near to 100%. I have about 20%, sometimes 30% in good lighting, new contact lenses, things like that that help me out. And so, because I'm not fully sighted, there's been some real hardships to deal with. One hardship I had to deal with was I've never had a driver's license, and I live in an area, I live in the United States, and we don't have the mass transportation that you might find in places like Spain and France. We're learning, we're coming along, but not not where you can walk out your apartment door, go 2 blocks, and anywhere you need to go, the mass transit will take you. We have a more limited system. So, not having a driver's license, well, you can imagine that limits how you're going to live. I have to make choices around, you know, living near mass transit and what is offered with mass transit. I've had to make sure I have the income for taxi and things like that. I've had to have the income for enlarging copy. You know, I work in editing, publishing, teaching, and I don't see 12-point font very well. Sometimes not at all if I don't have really good lighting. So I've needed to adapt. But the thing, really, the real reason why I haven't wanted to share with people at times that I'm albino is because as a child, I was just I was so bullied. You know, there were the kids that were just kind of pushed around a little. There were the kids that were pushed around more. There were kids that were made a spectacle of. And there were kids that also attracted violence and really devastating situations. And I was one of those kids. And I went to 13 schools, and it was the same in every school except for one. And that one school was when I was at kindergarten age, and everyone there had what in those days we called a handicap, something that held you back in some way, and you would spend life, learning how to overcome it, but you also, at this particular school, got a lot of support and extra skills so that you could overcome your handicap. That is the only school I ever went to where I wasn't just morbidly teased, bullied, chased, victimized. And when you go to public schools and 6 hours a day you're there and you go to 6 different classes, there's 6 different opportunities to endure that. And no matter what age I've been, I've just wanted to protect myself from being known as someone that lived with a handicap. And yet I would say I was around 20, 21, 22. I hadn't yet started college, but I was about to. And I was realizing the more I kept that story quiet, the harder it was for me to have quality relationships, because it was like you could know that first part of me. Oh, why is my hair so blonde? Oh, because my family's from England, Ireland, and Norway. And so that's just how we look. There, done, over. But it wasn't enough when I wanted to get to know people well and they wanted to get to know me well. I had to tell them, actually, I'm albino and I don't see everything. In fact, I spend a lot of time each and every day to accommodate for what I'm not seeing. And I do pretty well in the world. And I live close to what mass transit we have. And I keep up on enlarged print and things like that. And I cooperate with the world as best I can to be a part of it. But I had to get used to. I really did. I had to get used to working with myself first and letting myself know it's okay as you meet new friends, you have new work buddies, you move to new places. There's people in the neighborhood you want to say hello to and get to know. It's okay to tell more of your story and stand strong that you've lived long enough to turn away if someone starts to poke fun, tease, bully. It's okay to leave. That's something I've had to grow into, knowing that as a little child, I couldn't really take care of myself on the level I needed care. When I was bullied at school, sadly, there just wasn't the protection that I really needed. I've told the story before. There was a day in a classroom where my skirt was set on fire. This kid had a lighter and he thought that would be funny. I was standing in that skirt. Fortunately, I wasn't badly hurt, but I was hurt. I was made fun of. That story got passed all over school, and it just made for another torturous tale that people would rub in my face and add names. I had so many names, nicknames that people, bullies, called me. So I had to learn as an adult, I'm not going to allow myself to be victimized in the way that I couldn't protect myself as a child. So what does that mean? It means that if I'm thinking I might be anonymous on public transportation and people in the back of the bus start to say really scary things, I feel vulnerable, I can go and sit in the very front of the bus behind the driver. If that's not enough, I can get off the bus and wait 10 minutes for the next one. But as a child, I didn't know I had these options, and I didn't feel strong enough, of course, as a child to protect myself. I had terrible anxiety. As I became an adult, I got interested more and more and more in writing, started writing my fictional stories. I found that I wasn't telling bullied stories about myself. I wasn't writing my memoirs so much, but I was adapting fiction. I was becoming a character that I wrote about that I saw got bullied, but it wasn't me. So I remember a boy in school who got badly bullied, and he never really talked about his story, but you could see it. Just like you could see that I'm very blonde, you could see that he was the largest kid in our grade. And when I went to school, there weren't very many children that stood many inches taller than anyone else. There weren't many students who, would be considered big or obese. There weren't that many. So he stood out. And he also had a lot of acne. And he was terribly teased and bullied and pushed around. I found out years later that on the last day of school, he committed suicide. It was so sad to me. I never made fun of him, but I also never made friends with him. And I know the reason why. The only reason why I never had the courage to make friends with him, even though I'm sure he was a very nice person, is that I thought if the bullies that came after him and then the bullies that came after me saw that we were friends, then between the two of us, we'd have twice as many bullies and it'd be bad for us. But again, that's what kids go through when they're bullied. They're vulnerable, but they're vulnerable to the extent that they can't really protect themselves to the degree that they need protection. Adults can. And maybe that's part of what attracted me to being a life coach and a teacher, is that I knew how to write. I knew how to immerse myself into imagining myself as different characters, working out the situations in fiction that maybe they couldn't work out in real life. I became trained as a teacher, and I have always been very sensitive to how people's brains work, how they adapt to their environment. But I think a lot of this was because I really wanted more friends growing up. I wanted to have more close neighbors and colleagues, and I wanted that closeness and that feeling of safety. And I didn't really understand at all until I got into my 20s how to just start sharing my story so that I felt like I was opening the door to being friends with others. And yet, if it didn't work out, I would be able to walk away. I'd be able to say, okay, I see that that story wasn't safe with that person, but I am going to find other people and I will experience good friendships. Is this landing for you, that you've been in situations where you're either a professional or budding storyteller on paper, or in your own life where you show up with friends or new people in your life, you really want to be that person that's more open, but maybe you have a past, or maybe you're sensitive to the things that have happened to you and you don't want to be vulnerable again. What I want to share with you is choose how much. Choose what you can say. When people say to me now, wow, where did you get that blonde hair? My goodness, you don't see that very often. I find myself saying, well, part of that's my heritage from Northern Europe, but another part of it is that I'm albino. Do you know what that is? And a lot of people go, oh, and then they feel uncomfortable. They say, oh, yeah, I do. You are? Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that. And because they're not offensive, they're just surprised. Then sometimes I can say, yeah, it just means I have low pigmentation, my eyes, my skin, my hair. You know, that's all. And that's me keeping it gentle, a gentle story. Some people want to know more. And if we're becoming friends, I welcome those questions. So when they say, wow, is it okay to ask you, did you find that at all hard while you were growing up? See, when somebody asks a question like that, I can tell that they're on my side. They want to know more because they're curious about me and they're curious about being friends with me. They're not saying, like, so is there something I need to know in order to be your friend? Like something that wouldn't be on it, obvious to me? If they have their hands up or I see them really backing away, I I use that as well. That's information for me that they're uncomfortable. And maybe in future conversations, I can say things to help them feel more comfortable. But if I can't, it's okay. It's okay that I decided to take some steps in and be vulnerable. And if I have to walk away, I will, because I can as an adult. I didn't have that ability as a child. I didn't have very many adults protecting me. And I think that would make for another good video. Where were the adults? That's going a little more vulnerable with you. Let's see how this video does. Let's see how many haters it attracts. And if in fact people are genuinely curious, I think I will. I'll talk about where were the adults? Why was this on me as a child? But as I wrap up, what I want to encourage you to do, this is something my friend Chad does on his channel, where he's titled it Sweat Talk, Chad Listenbee. You should follow him. I'll actually put his channel down below. But I noticed that he chooses a word and says, start your comment with that word. Would you be willing to start your comment with the word story? And let's see how that attracts people that like to share stories, like you and like me. And let's just see where this goes. It is my hope that whatever story you have, you are coming into your being and knowing if you just take a little more at a time, offer out a little more at a time with those you trust, surely your story will be shared. I help people with this. Down below, you can find links and ways you can get in touch with me if you would like some help sharing your story. I come back here a few times a week, and I would love for you to subscribe, like, and follow. It's a joy to be with you. Take good care, my friend.